look at our unit on ecology, we're going to focus quite a bit on dealing with and talking about different populations of animals. So this video focuses on that. But first, let's go ahead and talk about, before we can get into population ecology, we're going to talk about some general terms and characteristics about how species are distributed on planet Earth. So one of the words is dispersal, and dispersal is kind of like how they're dispersed or they're spread out. So in this case, dispersal is the movement of individuals or gametes away from their area of origin. So gametes could include like pollen for plants, or eggs or sperm in the water if it's fish, etc. So really there's three forms or three modes of dispersal. On land, you have limitations. So for example, kangaroos are limited to Australia because they're not going to swim across the ocean to find another continent. So some organisms will be landlocked, which will limit their dispersal. You also have air can aid in dispersal, like pollen can spread in the wind. Birds are able to fly and to migrate, and so they may spend some of their life in Canada or near the Arctic, and then some of their life in South America. And then there's water. And when we look at water, lakes, you're going to have isolated populations because they're limited to that lake. Whereas in the ocean, well, dang, it covers 70% of our Earth. And so dispersal is also part of the species range. And when you look at the word range, we can divide it into two categories. You have the potential range versus the actual range. So the potential range is really like potentially where you could find these animals. Like where could they actually live? So here we see a forest, and potentially it could be filled with these deer. But in reality, there's going to be competition. Well, so here, potential range is where the species could live, but really here are some caribou or some reindeer that may be interacting or competing with this population of deer. So therefore, you see here between the red lines is the actual range where you'll actually find this population. So what is dispersal and how does it relate to range? That gets in your box 1. So now what determines how species are distributed on planet Earth? Well, how come these deer don't cover the entire planet? Well, we talked earlier about dispersal in land. I don't think deer are really going to swim across the ocean to change continents. But really, when you look at other factors, like predators, for example, will keep this deer population in check. There's also going to be competition. So there's going to be a competition for resources. The deer and the caribou may eat the same food, and so therefore that kind of prevents that deer population from increasing in size too rapidly. There also is going to be pathogens. Pathogens will limit how large a population can grow. And then parasites and disease can also limit the size of a population. For deer, there's a disease called Lyme disease that causes them to be sick. And so these things that are going to limit this population are called biotic factors. Biotic factors are the interaction between living things. Now there's also things that are not living. So temperature. All organisms on Earth have a specific temperature that they prefer. Also availability of drinking water. Is there water? Like think about life in the desert, for example. The desert, even though it has tons of space, doesn't have large amounts of life simply because there's a limited amount of water. Especially if that water, if they're in a drought or the water dries up, that's going to definitely limit the population size. If there is drought or poor soil, so sometimes the nutrients that are available in an ecosystem can limit the population size. If the plants die, now there's no food for the herbivores and the whole food web is affected. As well as sunlight. Sometimes if the sun, let's say a volcano erupts and blocks the sun from reaching Earth, that's going to lower photosynthesis or primary productivity, which can also affect the size of the population. And so these factors that are not living things are called abiotic factors. That A right there stands for without. So when you see this right here, this is like without life. Okay, so now let's go ahead and look at here. Here's a picture of my family on a Sentinel Dome in Yosemite, and you can see in the background Half Dome. Now, Half Dome, like you see here, there's trees. There's soil down below this rocky dome, but over here you see not a lot of life, and that's because there's rocks. There's not a lot of soil on that surface, and therefore that would affect population sizes. Also, if you get too high up in elevation, sometimes the air is too thin and there's not enough carbon dioxide, which would be another abiotic factor that would limit the size of the plant populations. Here, on this next slide, you can see my husband fishing there. And in this ecosystem, there is water, but you can kind of tell from the picture that it's kind of hot. And when you look at the soil's kind of dry. And so the abiotic factors here, the temperature, the amount of rainfall, the soil quality, and the sun's intensity will also determine the type of plant populations that you'll see and find here. And then those plant populations will have an influence on the animal populations that you find. Actually, on this fishing trip, I found 2 different snake skeletons and stuff. It was kind of a fun trip. All right, so now when we look at some words for you, things that determine how species are distributed on planet Earth, you have interactions between the organisms, predators, herbivores, competition, parasites, etc. And then you have interactions with the environment, the temperature, the water, the oxygen availability. If you're fish living in the water, you still need oxygen. So how much oxygen is available in your water? The salinity, the sunlight, the soil. So this top here in red are your biotic factors, the interactions of living things that affect populations and communities and ecosystems. And the things down here in black are your abiotic factors that are going to influence different populations of species on Earth. Okay, so what are abiotic and biotic factors, and what role do they play in an organism's life goes in your box 2. Now we're getting to the next section, and we're looking specifically at populations and how you study them. So population ecology explores how biotic and abiotic factors influence the density, distribution, and the size of the population. So here I'm going to define this population of birds. When we talk about populations, we usually give them a location. I can't just say sparrows. I'd have to say sparrows in Eastvale. Now I have a specific population that I'm studying. So members of a population, now this right here is super key, guys. This box, focus on it. Members of a population rely on the same resources. They're also influenced by similar environmental factors and are likely to interact and breed together. In our next unit, when we talk about evolution, we talk about evolution in terms of populations. And so these factors that they use the same resources, they're all exposed to the same environment, as well as the fact that they interact and breed together, play a role in both ecology as well as evolution. Okay, so when we look at the size of a population, it's determined by the number of births, and individuals moving in or immigration, as well as the deaths and emigration, individuals leaving. So size of the population is affected by those 4 factors in terms of size. Now, when we look at, so in box 3, if you could summarize population ecology. Now, our next thing to talk about in terms of population is density. So here I have a forest, and when you look at it, you're like, cool, there's trees randomly spread throughout this forest. However, the density of a population you can measure, and it's the number of individuals per unit of area or volume. So if you're dealing with things like bacteria, you might talk about per square centimeter, versus if you're talking about maybe, horses, you might talk about it in per acre or per square mile or something. So when we look at these trees, we can divide it up into an even grid, and let's pretend that one of these rectangles represents a hectare. So a hectare is roughly 2.5 acres, and it's a unit of area. And so when I were to calculate population density, I can see here that in this hectare, I have 2 trees. So I have 2 pine trees per hectare if I were to sample this population or sample of this forest. Now that's not a true representation because obviously if I look at a different hectare, I'm going to get different results. Down here in the bottom, I have 9 pine trees per hectare. And then this one, I have 4 pine trees per hectare. So when we're talking about population density, it's important to take multiple samples in order to get more accurate results. Okay, so what is population density and how would you calculate it? In your box 4. Now, dispersion is the pattern of spacing among individuals. So in dispersion, here I have this forest, and I can see there's not really any trend or pattern to it. So this is called random dispersion. So how does this happen? As a child, or even now, you've most likely taken one of these little dandelion plants and made a wish. Well, those are seeds that you're spreading for weeds. And so let's say you're in a field and you find one and you make a wish. Well, now you're spreading those seeds randomly, and where they land, if they happen to land in soil that has the right nutrients and the right amount of water and the right amount of sunlight and all the right or correct abiotic factors, well, now you have weeds start to grow, and you're going to have these dandelions pop up randomly in the field. So that's an example of random dispersion. You could also have clumped. So in clumped, we see this a lot of times in animal populations. So starfish, here you can see them living in a clumped pattern. Or even we find this in herds of animals and animals that either migrate in herds like caribou or wildebeests. But we also see this in wolf packs that use groups for hunting. So here these wolves, you find them in a clumped distribution. Across Yellowstone National Park, there's currently about 10 groups of wolves, 10 packs of wolves that hunt together. And then the last type of dispersion is called uniform dispersion. Now that'd be kind of weird if you walked into a forest and all the trees are planted evenly. But in reality, this is common in like bird species, especially birds that build their nests on the ground. So we can see here these penguins, they collect rocks to build their nests to lay their eggs. And so when a penguin starts to build their nest, they build them in a uniform fashion to help identify their territory, as well as to limit aggression between penguins. And so they build them just out of pecking range. So here you would have uniform distribution of the population. A lot of times that's for territory. So in box 5, summarize the 3 different types of population dispersion and include examples.